welcome back. We've reached number 7, guys. This episode, Ollie Horn. Ollie Horn, a comedian, studied as a lawyer, became like the unofficial... I mean, Bob Mortimer used to do that. Wasn't it the case that when Jarvis Cocker famously at the Brits stormed the stage in protest to Michael Jackson's very pretentious performance, I think he got arrested and Bob Mortimer went down drunk to try and bail him out because he's had a bit of legal experience. So there is a precedence for comedians helping their mates out, and Ollie Horn has definitely got a thing, but a sort of like track record of doing that. He's just got back from the Edinburgh Festival. Spoke briefly about that at the start. Not too long if you're not into the nuts and bolts of comedy. It's a very short period, 5 minutes max to get through, and I think it's quite an interesting discussion. I then sort of like asked him some white van man type questions about what's going on with the sort of changing legal landscape of the country, with the the perception of two-tier policing, and how some of the people that were involved in the protests, riots, whatever you want to call them, were dealt with very harshly and swiftly. I wanted to get into more about how that what people would deem to be more serious criminals are being let out of prison to accommodate them is a kind of performative show of strength. Anyway, about how politics is starting to creep into legality, and I guess the law has always been informed and dictated by politics, but at the moment it seems to be like if you've got the wrong politics, the law treats you differently to be... I don't know. Anyway, that's what the podcast's about. Why the fuck am I telling you now? But that seems to be what I do. But anyway, I think it was a good conversation. There's a couple of little bits I'm going to have to take out for whatever reason, legally. So if you notice a little tiny jump cut, it's just that sort of thing. Nothing. You're not missing anything sort of like that you would... It's just sort of like specifics that you probably didn't want to hear, or you might want to hear, but specifics that I don't want to put out there. Don't want to get in trouble, do I? If I get in trouble, I've only got that fucking Ollie Horn to bail me out. I'll be fucked. So anyway, let's get into it. That was poor. Let's get into it. And as if by magic, on the Skype machine, look at his face. Hello, it's Ollie Horn.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm really good, actually.
We've twinned in black t-shirts. We didn't do that on purpose, but
slimming.
Yep. Well, that's where I'm at the moment. So, where are you in the world, Ollie? Because I know you're a bit of a globetrotter. I never know where you're going to be or are.
Yeah, right now I'm in Edinburgh.
Oh.
Then I'll be back down in London tomorrow. But yeah, this is perfect Edinburgh weather. You know, like nice, sunny, crisp. It's actually a shame I'm indoors right now. It's like genuinely perfect weather.
I've been having we're having a nice little bit of weather. I've got COVID. Did you know this?
Yeah, well, I knew that you were sick.
Yeah.
But I didn't know this was what it was.
I got married on Tuesday, and we had a guest who brought, as a wedding gift, gave me, my wife, my children, my ex-wife, Darius COVID, that we know of.
So Darius, okay, so I didn't know Darius had COVID.
Me and Darius did GB News. We did Leo's show on Saturday, and I don't know if it's a Middle Eastern thing, but as we were live on air, he's just like going, not doing all this sort of like disgusting throat clearing noises. But speaking of Edinburgh, briefly, everyone who goes to the festival, I'm always obsessed with the current and future projected state of the festival, because I've heard it could be finally, which they always say, but in its last throes. What do you think?
It's not going anywhere.
Really?
And I'm quite bullish on this. If you are an act without a profile and the social media thing hasn't worked for you yet, there is no better place in the world to get an audience of 40, 50 people to watch you every day. There is nowhere else. And you spend £295 for your festival registration fee. That is, in my experience, the best value for money, or the best ROI, I should say, of any advertising spend for any comedy endeavour anywhere.
But do you, because you're in Edinburgh still now, do you have access to sort of like cheaper, or what? It's accommodation that's the killer for most, isn't it?
Yeah, so I do have a place which I can stay here, which helps. But
it helps massively.
No, but even if I were paying $2,000 a room, I would still have made money this year, because I do it like I don't play all those games. So my venue rental was like less than £1,000 for the month, whereas some people are paying like 3 or 4 grand versus a 40% minimum. I charge proper money for my tickets now. So I used to charge like £6, but now this show at least I had a bit of faith in, so I charged £14.50 at the weekends, which isn't actually that much money these days. Like people were spending that on a pizza at a food truck, or they were spending like £300 on a hotel for the night. So I didn't feel any guilt, and all of my concession prices were cheap anyway. So concession I think was still £6.50. So I don't feel like I was ripping anyone off. So yeah, if you get 50 people a day, each giving you £14 over 22 days, it's like there's money to be made.
I guess the only thing I'd say is the model of Edinburgh or festivals in general kind of feels like going speed dating in the age of Tinder. It's a very analog, antiquated way of doing something that is, because you can scroll on TikTok and you can see a clip of someone actually doing stand up rather than a flyer with a picture of you and you're sort of like analog in the real world trying to lasso an audience together. Obviously, but like you said it right at the start. If the social media thing hasn't worked for you yet, that's a way to go and learn your chops, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and I think there's no better place for a new act to kind of run through their first hour in a fairly low stakes way.
100%, yeah.
It's way harder, actually, economically. I remember the first years I came up to Edinburgh nearly 10 years ago, I was just like sleeping on a friend's kitchen floor, and everything could be done really cheap. I don't think those same opportunities are available now, but I do also think the quality of the audience you get here is good, and by that I mean I went for pizza last night, newsflash, and the server said, "Oh, I saw you at the Fringe," and I said, "Oh, did you enjoy it?" She went, "Yeah, I'll be coming back next year." And that's someone who isn't a comedy fan necessarily. She hasn't followed me online. She's not signed up to my mailing list, but she spent long enough with me that she recognizes my face, and I'll be on her radar for next year. So that's why the posters help, because she probably doesn't. She might not even remember my name. But if she is walking through town next year and she sees my face on a poster, she'll go, "Oh, he was all right."
Yeah.
So that ecosystem still exists, and I think people underestimate it.
No, just the only thing I guess I'm worried about is that the audience getting priced out. I mean, I don't know how. I mean, if I was just a punter, and I had like a week to spare in August, I just don't know how much it would cost now to go to Edinburgh and stay in a nice hotel and go to shows. I mean, it's a bit of a worry, especially if Oasis apparently going to be there next August, aren't they?
Yeah, but I see that as I don't think.
I think that's more of a reason for people to be there, isn't it?
Yeah, I actually think people are going to go up and go, "Oh, the Fringe is on. We'll go watch a couple of shows." So I mean, I generally have like an abundance mentality in that I do think that there's still more money to be made. Like the Fringe, we're not competing against each other. We're competing against an Edinburgh local, or maybe not even an Edinburgh local, someone that lives within commuting distance from Edinburgh, deciding to come in for the weekend or not.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's really what we're competing with. I saw this insane blog post on Chortle that someone wrote a blog post saying, any large acts, any big name acts who are coming up to the Fringe and putting on their extra shows, just know that you are literally taking.
I saw that.
Oh, I couldn't disagree with it more. They said you are literally taking money out of the pockets of smaller acts, and I actually believe the economic model is the opposite. That having a big name act means that someone who is on the fence about popping into the Fringe might come in, and then might stick around and take a chance.
More than that, Ollie, not just on the fence. I mean, you are going to go there to see said big acts. No one's. If it was just the free Fringe, if they did, say they just said the free Fringe in July, no one would go.
Yeah.
It would be like Camden or Brighton, which are fine fringes, but they're not like the biggest arts festival in the world, are they?
I completely agree. That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, I like. Also, you look at the stats. Like the majority of ticket purchases still have an EH postcode. Like it is.
Yeah.
I remember, the last year of it being like a really English festival was 2019, I think.
What do you mean, punters as well?
Yeah, pre-COVID.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I think Edinburgh. I think the reason that the Edinburgh Fringe is the one is because of the location. I think it's a very artistic and very sort of like intellectual area, Edinburgh, isn't it? I think that I think I think there's a reason why the Fringe just took foothold in Edinburgh rather than another city. I think. Yeah,
I agree. Well, I agree, and I also think people do berate the council and they make a lot of poor decisions. They make a lot of poor decisions for the Fringe, But that doesn't mean the decisions themselves are poor. It just means that, like any local government, they're just prioritising other things.
Yeah, you get idiots involved, don't you?
Yeah. Or maybe those decisions are good if they're, like all the stuff to do with accommodation prices going up. Well, the reason the accommodation prices are going up is it's becoming harder to be a temporary landlord. Well, yeah, that is bad. But also, how many times have you seen news reports of like dodgy landlords and people going, well, the council should intervene and make sure there are minimum safety standards. Oh, wait, you can't have both. So while the council definitely can be criticised in terms of not being the best custodians of the festival, I think firstly there's a bit of inertia. I always think it's a bit like the royal family. Like, would we create the royal family now? No.
Yeah, you're stuck with them.
But but like, would we get rid of them? Can we actually think of anything better? No. Well,
the other thing is, it seems like on the 1st of August, it's a shock to Edinburgh Council that it's the Fringe. Like, they don't seem to spend 11 months of the year preparing and making the infrastructure better and the accommodation better. And it's like, oh shit! It's almost like it's a surprise to them that people show up.
Yeah, and they do show up in huge numbers. I mean, it's kind of incredible that somehow, basically everyone. Not basically, a lot of people from the UK comedy scene, and not just comedy. Obviously, we think about the comedy, but I'm sure the same is true for theatre.
Yeah, I think it was a comedy festival, which is wrong.
But it's, like my ex was a contemporary dancer at the time. That's a joke.
Yeah,
which I do in my show.
There's a play on the word contemporary.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah. But when her experience of the festival was like, it's a dance festival. Like all she knew was like all the dance venues and like. That was a whole world that I never knew about, and I do think it's kind of incredible that, that this thing exists. And as much as you could say that the internet has democratized networking and whatever, there is kind of nothing like what happens in the artist bars. That is like just having a nice drink with a friend, and then another group of people come along, and you start chatting, and then just that conversation could be the reason that you're now booked to go to Jakarta for a headline set. That doesn't happen anywhere else.
It almost must be what it's like, when like furries have a convention and they've all been online using their avatars, and then they're in some hotel somewhere going, "Oh, we're here, we all are." There's PX7209 over there dressed up as a fox. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like like I said, it's like when the virtual world becomes real. And that's what it's like when you're walking down the street and you bump into 11 comedians who you normally only see 2 or 3 at a time in green rooms.
Yeah, or also people that you've had a fight with online. Like
I wouldn't do that because I'm a nice guy. But you're more of an antagonist, maybe.
I don't think that's true. But someone did tell me a story of a guy that literally 2 hours before started slagging another act off online, and then was stood outside Monkey Barrel trying to exit fly their show. Yeah. And they went, "What the fuck? What are you doing?" Yeah. And they were like, "Oh, but no, you did slag me off 2 hours ago. Just because it was to my Twitter doesn't mean I'm not annoyed about it."
Well, anyway, that's Edinburgh. So the reason I wanted to speak to you today is because anyone in comedy would know you've sort of like unofficially become the legal counsel for the comedy, for the very low-paid comedians, I would say.
Yeah. To know, yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm like
if someone can't afford an actual legal representative, it's Ollie will step in, which is a heroic thing to do. I'm not disparaging it.
But also, I am like the Lionel Hutz in that my success rate is probably worse than if you just roll the dice.
But you're free. I don't. Are you free? I don't want to misrepresent.
I've never charged any money to anyone.
So you studied law. You studied law, and the reason I want to get you on is because obviously the law's in the news a lot lately, and not just. Like normally when the law is in the news, it's about like a case, like are they guilty or not guilty, in a bit of a soap opera or a drama. But at the moment, I think legislation and the two-tier policing, I think I've never known the law to be as discussed as much as it is at the moment. Like the letter of the law and how it's applied. So
well, I've got a theory about this actually, which we can come on to. But the brief background is in fact, I've just had to write my bio for some corporate work. And my flex is I've got 3 law degrees that I studied in 3 different languages. That's my one sentence show off thing. So I studied a BA in legal philosophy here in the UK, and then I did a diploma in European law, and then I did my master's and I did some research and teaching in intellectual property law. But I haven't practiced as a lawyer really. I've done a little bit of helping with private client work and a bit of advising, but basically I'm not a lawyer.
No, but that's probably good because you said the first one was that legal philosophy, did you say?
Yeah.
So was that more because what I was wanted to ask you actually is, obviously I don't know anything about this sort of thing. So when you study law, I wanted to know how much of it is bricklaying and how much of it is architecture. I would say that legal philosophy is leaning more towards the architecture, as in like the structure and the reasons for, rather than the nuts and bolts how to apply.
Yeah, I think you're right. What happens is when you do your qualifying law degree, you kind of learn the extremities. So you learn all the cases which made it up to the Supreme Court or House of Lords before the Supreme Court existed. So you look at like essentially the test cases where the law has been stretched to its outer limits and a judge has had to make a judgment. And a lot of the discussions are things like, well, if the facts were just slightly different, might the judgment have gone a different way? Or you might look at what are called problem questions, which is like a scenario. Say like there's a holiday park that knows that they've got a ditch which could be dangerous if children fell in it. They put up a sign saying danger, but the sign was at such a height that no 3-year-old could see it, and 3-year-olds are illiterate anyway. If a 3-year-old were to have run into that ditch and got injured, should that holiday park be liable, right? And so you have to look at really specific bits of like occupiers liability legislation and the chain of causation of, well, is the mother or the father of that child negligent? So like you basically look at like the far extremities, and then when you qualify as a lawyer and you do your legal practice course, or if you become a barrister, that equivalent, that's when you look at like the day-to-day stuff. Because I think what most people forget about the law is most of the time things are not litigated. Like the vast majority of time that the law is engaged with, it's when both parties have a certain outcome in mind. Like generally speaking, contractual disputes don't end up in court. Often, if someone is arrested for a criminal matter, it's rare that it's appealed and the law is contested. It's almost always a question of fact finding. So actually, what you learn in a law degree is far more about the theory and the why. Yeah. And so that's why, like, so for example, something that's just come up in the news this week is the newsreader, the BBC newsreader, who's just been convicted of...
Hugh Edwards.
Hugh Edwards, who's just been convicted of possessing child pornography. Yeah. That's the kind of thing which, in a normal law degree, you wouldn't really be looking at deeply at like sentence guidelines. Well,
that's interesting because most people would. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go.
Yeah.
Most people would say that his sentence, well, to the man in the street, would say that his sentencing is unacceptably lenient. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? But then I guess one of the benefits of having legal training is I can kind of read the judgment and I can work out, well, it's not just the judge, but there's also like the sentencing council guidelines. So the judges have a lot less discretion these days anyway. But you can kind of work through the logic and go, well, let's take a step back and look at legal philosophy. What is the point of criminal law, right? Like, what is the point of criminal law?
To protect the rest of society, possibly?
Yeah, to protect against harm, I'd say. Yeah. So it's basically to protect against future harm. It's not really about retribution. I guess there's a bit of retribution, and that definitely plays a part in sentencing. But it's mainly like the reason that murder is the worst crime.
Deterrent.
Is because, well, yes, definitely. Definitely there's partly deterrent, but it's also, why do we punish murder the most, or why do we treat it the most severely? It's because you've deprived somebody of all of their liberties forever. It's because you have to deprive someone a lot of liberty, particularly a child sexual offence can, ruin someone's brain forever. But it hasn't taken all of their liberty forever. What if I chopped your leg off? Would that be a crime? Yes, it would. But would I go to prison in the same way as if I murdered you? No, because I've not. So like basically, the reason that we have sentencing guidelines and we have prison is to prevent against future harm and to act as a deterrent. But we just know that if you were to double the sentence, we won't get half as many murders. We know that's not how criminals think, right? Because
especially crimes of passion as well, isn't it? I mean, because okay, let's get back before we move on. The Hugh Edwards thing. The thing with him is.
Do you want to run through why it's so lenient? Because I think I know the answer.
Oh, I'd love to. Well, firstly, I'd like to say the signs were there, because I remember back in the day he actually reported on Gary Glitter's conviction, and Hugh Edwards actually said, the police found 1,500 images. Some of them were Category 5, which were amongst the best ones.
Well, I kind of wish I haven't been doing any gigs the last 2 nights because I've just come up here to like sort a bunch of stuff out. But I wish I'd gigged last night because I did think of a joke, which was I was reading about this case, and one of the things that he put in mitigation was that he always felt like an outsider, that he had anxiety and depression. And part of that stemmed from the fact that he never got into Oxford, and he went to Cardiff, and he always had a chip on his shoulder working at the BBC, where in the newsroom, everyone went to Oxford.
Yeah.
And so my punchline to that would have been, there's no better way of fitting into the BBC than being a nonce. He went straight for the most BBC thing you can do.
Yeah, I can imagine him going home and taking it out on his partner for being over 16. Like, you're holding me back at work, sort of thing. So it was very lenient in the eyes of the public, but in the eyes of the law, was it? Is the question?
Well, it depends what you mean by lenient. I mean, firstly, I think it goes without saying what he's done is abhorrent and horrible, right? So this isn't me saying that it's in any way defensible, but there are guidelines, which is if he had himself molested a child, that would automatically put him in definite custodial sentence. So we're looking at basically he is in possession of some images. So that doesn't mean that he is part of perpetuating more harm. And you could argue that him being the market for it encourages it, blah blah blah. But
isn't that similar to receiving stolen goods? They're always quite harshly prosecuted, aren't they? Because if you take away the demand, you take away the supply.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's definitely true. But he was already in sentencing guidelines that would have meant that he was looking at a custodial sentence, but maybe up to like 2 years, something like that, right? 2 years behind bars for what he did. But he did loads of things right that meant that got cut. So, for example, he did an early plea. So the law encourages early pleas of guilty because it frees up the court's time, frees up police time. It means their rehabilitation can start quicker. So that automatically cut off a bunch of time. He also did show remorse, right? Like he wasn't indignant and going, yeah, I'll do it again. He engaged with counsellors, and so that knocks off a bit of time too. Plus, it was his first offence, and so that knocks off a bit of time. So that's how you get down to the 6-month sentence. And then why do we suspend sentences? That's purely practical. Well, right? Like,
the only thing I think the argument would be, Ollie, is we're in a climate of, well, we're in a strange place legally, aren't we? There is all this debate of 2-tier policing, and people that looted Greg seem to be treated more harsh than a sex offender or a man with a map. I mean, I'm talking. I'm probably not giving the white van man perspective.
I guess this isn't me. Look, what I'm not saying is the way that the sentencing guidelines is good.
No.
But what I am saying is that they were fairly applied to him.
I'm saying they were. But do you not think they were fairly applied to him to the letter of the law in a climate where people may think that the law is being unfairly applied to other people to act as that deterrent I speak of? I feel like Starmer is trying to make an example of people that might be awful people and have views that you would never subscribe to and have gone about it the wrong way. But the letter of the law, shouldn't it always be applied evenly and blindly?
Well, I think you're right. But I think what often happens is exactly what we're getting into now, which is we look at one particular case and we go, okay, another BBC nonce, lock him up. But okay, a good counterexample to this is the Just Stop Oil protesters, because I remember on the Rest is Politics podcast, they were talking about this and basically said, oh, it seems like those sentences are really quite strict, right? You know, they were basically locking people up. These sentences weren't suspended, right? They were sending them to prison for 6 months, sometimes
and
12 months.
And very swift as well.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. I mean, you know, we can't argue with that. It's good that happens quickly. But what they didn't do, which I did do, was read the judgment, because one of the good things about our legal system is the judge has to justify their decision and they have to put it in writing. And so what the judge said was, well, these people, firstly, they're not showing remorse. So they're saying, yeah, I'll do it again, right? So that's the first thing that they're saying. They're also saying things like the harm that they were intending to do was enormous. So I don't think you could do equivalence of the harm that Hugh Edwards has caused by looking at these awful images and what the protesters are doing. You can't actually create a moral equivalence. But these protesters were looking to cause literally tens of millions, if not
almost
billions,
terrorism, isn't it? Almost the most, the most disruption and harm they cause, the better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's not just stopping a road. It's preventing, you know, critical organs to be delivered for a transplant, and it's like, so you've got to actually say, well, the point of the criminal law is to prevent harm. The harm that they were looking to achieve was absolutely enormous. And of course, their argument is, yeah, but it's justified because of our moral case, justifiable. And I guess that's arguable, but the judge just didn't believe that on the merits, right? The judge didn't, the judge made allowances for it, and said, I really believe in the severity of your conviction, but that's not enough to say you're therefore not going to get punished. So with those guys too, there definitely was a deterrent effect, no doubt, right? Yeah. Definitely the judge was thinking, I probably should go nearer the top end than the bottom end because we want less of this. And so there's never not a deterrent effect. But the main reason that those Just Appalls protesters got the time that they did was they didn't plead all of them guilty. They fought their case. They basically did everything that Hugh Edwards didn't do. They were stubborn.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I get that. But I guess, did you not? But the trouble I think that a lot of people are feeling, certainly people that I speak to, is Just Stop Oil were treated very harshly because of all the reasons you said, which makes sense to me. But then, for example, a Black Lives Matter protest seems to have been treated with more sensitively because of the cause and because of the message behind the protest. It seems to be policed and sentenced differently. And do you not think that's a dangerous? Is that not what we mean when we say two-tier?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I think this term two-tier, it seems to mean different things to different people, but sure. But that general point of the law should be applied equally, I think it's a nice idea to think about. But I guess one of the things that you learn in law school is that every single case does turn on its merits. And while it's a nice ideal to say we're all equal under the law, if you get the same facts, the same outcome should apply. While that's a nice thing to think about, the truth is there are never the same facts. There are literally never the same facts.
But protest is slightly different because a protest is a protest is a protest. So if someone's message is Black Lives Matter and the police are taking the knee, and I know that when it comes to the law, and you're probably very well trained and versed to not talk in hypothetical specific examples.
Yeah.
During the lockdown, you had anti-lockdown protesters, and you had Black Lives Matter. One seemed to be very harshly clamped. I know this might be wrong. One seemed to be harshly clamped down and policed, and one seemed to be allowed to run, and that seems to be on the ideology of the actions rather than the actions. You
might be right. I mean, because you're not the first to have that perception of how things went, and I do get the impression that, particularly around Black Lives Matter, they were given a really wide berth. But I suppose...
Okay, so for example, specifically, Black Lives Matter were not in any way derided or policed or reprimanded for breaking the lockdown. I mean, just that one thing. We all.
I actually don't know. I know I don't know if that's actually true, though.
No, I don't either. But it's fun, right? Just...
I mean,
stir it up a bit. I ain't got a fucking clue what it
let's but I mean let's not totally free speech this. Let's
I'm trying to ask the questions that I think people would want answered. But I think that's the perception. Is that rightly or wrongly? That is the perception out there.
Of course, it's the perception. And that is the way that policing is perceived to be done is sometimes as important as how it's actually done. I suppose the judgment that's being made, and obviously the police are supposed to be separate from the government, right? But often they are being told what to do, because when you're looking at stuff like potentially national protests about race, you might be thinking, well, yes, these people are protesting and breaking the rules, but if we didn't allow them to, obviously you just got to think about how the people in power are thinking. Is that going to lead to even more civil unrest and even more? And so I guess I do what I want a criminal justice system and a legal system that generally allows for discretion. And I know that's not a popular view, because it means you've got to put trust in institutions and trust in authorities. But I like the idea. I don't want our justice to be administered by AI. And if you want to take the view that there shouldn't be any discretion, it should be there's a black and white set of rules that are applied, then we take judges and we take juries out of it, and I think that's really dangerous.
But that's case to case. That's like you're right. I totally agree. You would not want anything to be done by AI, and there must always be an injection of humanity. But I guess the danger is the popular politics of the day seem to be they seem to be having too much of a factor in how things are policed. I mean, let's not forget, what was the impetus of the whole Black Lives? It was 2-2 policing. It was, George Floyd was...
Well, something else which I think we do forget about is that there is a massive, and this isn't talked about enough, that there is a big difference between the court system and the police. And I know that's an obvious thing to say, but something that I think our court system's really good at doing compared to other countries is holding the police to account. So like you have to, you've all heard of like instances where people have got off a speeding fine because the police officer didn't turn up to the magistrate's court.
Yeah.
Right? Like we don't trust the police and the courts don't trust the police. The courts say, no, come and bring your evidence. And even all the way up to the very highest levels, I think like we've got a really good system of judicial review for police decisions. So what that means is if a senior police official has made a decision to, I don't know, cordon off something or to not allow something to happen or to suppress some information or something, any citizen, and often it's not just any citizen, it's some kind of protest group or lawyer, but anyone with a special interest can go to the court and say, was this sensible? Right? Can basically a judge can review whether what the executive did was within tolerance according to a certain set of principles called the Wednesbury principles. And I think those kind of things, like we forget that this stuff does happen behind the scenes. And whenever we see an instance of the police being insane, and it happens all the time because a lot of police are, yeah, exactly. And like also just a lot of police officers are like just thick, poorly trained. Like hey,
I'm a female officer and I find that offensive.
Exactly. Like you're not dealing with the people who have got
I know, they're not.
So I think like one of the good things about our system is we don't expect police officers to know everything about every law. What we do is we let them do their best, and then when they get it wrong, they're held to account. And that, I think, is like the fact that the courts are independent, the fact that the courts, the fact that the government has lawyers that have to go and represent the government in the Supreme Court sometimes, I see as a really good thing.
Right, I love that you've just brought that. That perfectly brings me on to my next sort of line of questioning, Your Honour. Is well, if that is the case, but when Keir Starmer comes out and gives that speech, that sounds like he is saying, "Oh, you are going to be, you were going to feel the full force of the law." It felt like he was saying, "We're going to do it like this now." Like that politician seemed like he was forcing the hand of the judiciary system. Now, I don't know, but do you see what that seemed a bit authoritarian, didn't it?
Yeah, but think about it. Yes, and that plays well to the media. You can imagine judges in their tea rooms going, "Oh,
yeah."
Like just because he
and a bit like
think about our system, just because he says it doesn't mean they're going to do it.
No, I know, but it does seem like, okay, I want to get into some specific examples. I don't know them inside out, but so I think that might be. I can imagine the judges sitting around. It's a bit like when you go to the doctors and try and tell them what's wrong with you. They're just like, "Oh yeah, of course you have." I've been Googling it and I think I might have this, and you can see they switch off. Nothing winds a doctor up more than telling them what you're only trying to help. But I feel like probably judges might. But anyway, so that aside, things like, okay, I wanted to get into the social media thing because obviously that's a big conversation in the zeitgeist about the law at the moment and legality. Because I remember when the Sun would print that fictitious or non-factual story about what happened in Hillsborough, for example. As far as I'm aware, the Sun as an entity is fined and held to account, not the reporter. So with Twitter,
yes and no. I mean, what normally happens about specifically the Hillsborough stuff, I don't know. The individual reporter might have potentially been liable.
Okay.
But what if you're looking for money, right? Which these victims were, quite rightly so. You just go for who's got the money, and obviously the Sun's got the money, not the journalist.
Well, but that's because I'm saying, but they're editorial publications, aren't they? And when you have a platform such as Twitter, which is not editorial in any way, I don't know.
Yeah. I think you've whether deliberately or not, you've stumbled across the absolute crux of the current debate.
That is very offensive, could I just say? You've accidentally said something that makes sense.
Yeah,
it's the only explanation.
You've reached the conclusion of the debate before we've even started. Which
okay,
is,
sorry. Yeah, that's
what do we talk about? No, it's good. Which is like, why when the Sun publishes something, is there some form of like remedy when someone's harmed? But on Twitter, that's not the case.
And why does the Hillsborough journalist not face jail time when someone who shares a meme does? Hasn't even authored it?
Yeah, I mean that's so. Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. The simple answer to that specific question is it's a question of like interest, right? It's like what did the Hillsborough, what were the victims pushing for? Well, compensation. They don't care much about that journalist going to jail. The Crown Prosecution Service doesn't really seem to care too much. So they got what they wanted, which was a bunch of money, and as they rightly should. But this all comes down to... Okay, let me try and answer this. Let me try and explain where I think the debate is in reference to something which is totally unrelated. So, if we agree as a society that money laundering is bad, right, and we want to stop money laundering, there is a certain cost to preventing money laundering, right? That means that we even need to have the police surveying all the financial transactions that are going on, or banks need to keep an eye on all of our accounts and be a bit more invasive and ask more questions. And, like at some point, if we want money laundering to stop, at some point in the chain of interaction with our money, someone has to intervene. And whether that's the police, whether that's some other government authority, whether that's an NGO that decides to do it, right? Loads of stuff in this country happens because a charity decides that it's a good thing to do and they get given some special powers. And what we've decided as a country is that we spread that responsibility across quite a few different parties. So the bank has a certain obligation to do some checks, but if you end up money laundering and Barclays, and it wasn't that obvious to Barclays, they're not going to get a massive fine. They're going to go, well, you did your reasonable checks, you asked the right questions, but you got hoodwinked, right? And then what we do is we say, well, there are certain transactions where there's a much higher chance of money laundering. So property is a good example, right? People tie their money up in property.
Barbers.
Well, that's another good example, right? So what we then say is we're going to suggest that certain categories of transaction or certain businesses have that might be exposed risk have extra obligations on the people that interact with them. So it might be local councils, for example, when they're looking at business rates for these businesses, working out where this money's coming from. Or it might be in property, when you pay your conveyancer to do your transaction, that conveyancer, that solicitor that you're paying, it's your solicitor, remember, they might have additional legal obligations to check that the money that you're paying for the transaction has not been laundered, right? And so that's an example of, in a high-risk transaction, we give extra obligations to someone who really has no business, right? I'm paying my solicitor to do this transaction for me, and yet they've got a legal obligation to ask me a bunch of questions about my money to check the source of funds. Are you following me so far?
I'm as much as I think I'm ever gonna. Yeah, I'm trying.
What I mean is, right?
No, I get it. I'm not. This is, is. But you said you're very well educated in this, and
stop it.
Well, no, you are. You said at the start, you gave it was like fucking LinkedIn at the beginning, but it's like now you're saying all this stuff. I'm being honest. I'm really trying to follow you, but there are some bits I'm going, yeah, that probably makes sense to someone.
Okay, basically, I'm using money laundering as an example of like as a social, as a decision as a country, we want money laundering to stop, and we spread the responsibility to stop it across multiple different actors, and in certain high risk. In high-risk opportunities, give extra obligations, right? Yeah. So, how does that then apply to free speech? Well, generally, as a rule, we want hate speech to not exist, right? Like, generally, we don't want people to feel threatened online. We don't want people to make threats. We don't want people to cause harm or incite harm, right? That's the goal, but how do we spread that responsibility across all of society? That's the point.
This is brilliant. Yeah, we're going to get into that. That is where I want to go next. Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to give this analogy of like...
No, but then, can I just say, because I'm a conspiracy guy,
yeah.
When you say we want to stop money laundering, I'm thinking, do we? Because there's this big lump of untaxed money that they want to put through the tax system, and I think that's why they're not so hot on stopping laundering money, because ultimately the tax man gets his hooks into it, doesn't it?
Well, maybe it was a bad example, but
no, it's not a bad example, but that's the level I always.
Sure.
I'm a bit of a pirate like that.
Yeah, you're right. The tax man does get their money one way or another.
Yeah. But going back to the hate speech, I want to get into this because I've been thinking about this, and I've actually devised a couple of I don't know if they're thought experiments or hypotheticals. So there was a case, and I heard this. I don't know it very well, but I heard the Trigonometry boys have spoke about it a couple of times, where a young girl's friend died, and the young girl posted the lyrics to her dead friend's favourite hip hop track that contained the N-word. Now, apparently, the police visited this girl, and she was either prosecuted or arrested, or certainly investigated for publishing the N-word. But the hip-hop artist, whoever it was, I'm not sure, obviously wasn't punished or arrested when they published it. The music company, the record company, weren't published when they published it. Prosecuted or arrested when they published it. Neither was Spotify every time it's streamed. Now the trouble with society is a thing like the N-word. I want to use it specifically, right? Black people can use the N-word, because obviously this hip hop artist can. A white girl copy and pasting the lyrics seems to be full foul of the law. Now, that is where I think we're in a little bit of a dicey situation where what I'm saying about the law should be applied to all. Because what if, Ollie, and here's my thought experiment, what if an anonymous Twitter account, or X, whatever it's called now, spoke about the recent Kamala Harris campaign where she went to the southern states and she spoke in a very different accent, and she seemed to talk. So what if this anonymous Twitter account said, "Oh my God, I'm embarrassed. Kamala Harris going down to the south and N-wording it up." All right. Now that is a contentious statement and it's offensive. But then what if they're investigated and the police find out that anonymous Twitter account is actually run by a black person? This is where I think the danger is in the law. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, but haven't you answered the question that if the police were to investigate it and found the context was that was language used by a black person, like,
but it's still offensive to whoever's reading it, isn't it? And don't know just see what I'm saying. That's the thing. Is there a crime or not? There can't be a crime if it's performed by a certain person.
I hope that's not a crime. Like
I'm not saying I do either. I always fall on the side of less laws, please.
Oh, but definitely.
But I just think that's what I'm trying to say is, anyone reading that could still be offended and wounded by it. Like recently it came out that someone was making very anti-Muslim tweets during the Troubles, and it turns out he was a Muslim stirring up hatred. Now, if you're making it unsafe on the streets for Muslims, does it matter if you're... Like the Jussie Smollett is a good example. You know, like, does it matter? Does it matter if you're a Muslim yourself or white? Is it worse or better, or should it always be the same?
Yeah. Well... Okay, well, this is interesting. So, this law is almost always about harm to the recipient, right? So, the context of the person matters a lot less than the context of the intended recipient, right?
Got you.
The only time when the sender matters is when you're looking at like someone that's sending threats or false information. You've got to know whether the sender knew or believed that it was false. So like there's definitely instances where you look at the sender, but generally you only really look at the the intent to cause harm to an individual or a group.
But don't you think in society now that can be determined by, like I said, if a black person's using the N-word, if a white person's using the N-word on that they can be prosecuted for hate speech. But if an anonymous account's using it and they happen to be black and using it, the harm's there, isn't it? Because you're looking at it and the person reading it could be a black person, a young black boy reading it, and they don't know. I just find this is the trouble.
I see why this is tricky, because the recipient might impute certain characteristics about the author and therefore be offended. But you're saying if the recipient knew that they were black, they wouldn't be as offended as if they didn't.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
It's more about the poster. It's more about the publisher. And I'm saying, like, if you investigate, like this guy, there was one, right, where he was up in Sellafield, I think. And I'm jumping all over the place here, but it's quite a big... It's sort of coming at you from all angles at the moment. I know the media is sort of stirring it up, and I go on social media, and I think Elon Musk thinks I'm a Nazi if I look at my sort of like what's suggested for me seems to, but I just think that arguments and division is good for business interactions, isn't it? You know, so it's a very negative thing that I'm bombarded with, and I try to avoid social media. But,
yeah. Well, yeah, but I think that the world is better when people can say offensive things.
I do too. That's not what I'm saying. I know. I think we're all on the same page with that. What I'm saying is the way things are being policed at the moment seems to be a new thing. So anyway, so I was saying, a guy in Sellafield, he posted a picture of some, what they always say, military-aged men on small boats on the beach with the caption, "Coming soon to a town near you." Now I think he got jail time for that. I don't even know if he made the meme. I think he might have just shared it.
And do you know what he was prosecuted under? Do you know which law?
No, unfortunately, I don't. That's the half-assed thing that I am.
Because you've got there's the.
I think it's incitement for racial hatred, actually.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
Because this then probably isn't, because if it was under like the Malicious Communications Act or the which is the one which like predates the Communications Act, which a lot of them are getting it under, right?
Yeah.
I'd be surprised if that fell foul of it, because it is offensive to certain people, but I wouldn't say it's like grossly offensive.
But this is what I'm saying with Keir Starmer.
It could even be a bit of satire.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I'm saying. So say if a black person who ran an anonymous account used the N-word, I would say that incites more racial hatred than that meme. But because of their identity politics, they see this is the trouble with identity politics, isn't it? We should all be equal under the law, shouldn't it? It shouldn't matter who casts the stone. If the stone causes damage, the damage has been caused, I believe.
Well, yes, but there are limits to that way of thinking, aren't there? Because like, if I were to raise a fist to you, that would feel very different than if a woman were to raise a fist to you. That, like,
I don't think it should. I don't think it should.
No,
that always bothered me, actually. No, that always bothered me when I see a woman slap a man, and everyone would be like, "Hey," and I'd be like, "Fucking, if I slap," like I never got that hypocrisy.
Well, it's to do with the strength of the harm, right? Like you know, if I throw a punch at you, you don't stand a chance. Well,
that might be true, but I don't think that if you're a tiny little weaselly bloke, you should be allowed to go around twatting people.
No, but the point is, it's like how much harm are you actually causing?
And that's true. But I'm saying, so in this example, you could have very similar tweets using the same word, but that's what I'm saying. Just because culturally certain members of the society have a past to use a certain word, if you're going to police, and I don't know, this sounds like this isn't my opinion. I'm just asking questions in and around trying to understand it, and also trying to see the pitfalls for the future and try and see them coming. It's like, well, if you're gonna do this, then that does open it up to in the future there being a problem. So I think Keir Starmer's come down and gone, oh, there's a far right problem. They've started to riot. Let's really police their tweets differently than we do other people's. Whether I totally agree with you earlier when you said we want hate speech to be stamped, that of course I do. But I just don't want to live in a society where the law is not just unevenly applied, but unevenly legislated in that way.
Yeah, well, I have sympathy with that. And I suppose it's like lots of crimes aren't prosecuted for reasons that are not to do with anything other than like practicalities. That like there happened to be CCTV, or there didn't happen to be CCTV. Yeah, sure. And like I guess we're quite. This is the kind of thing where it takes quite a lot of police resources, and it's the kind of thing which the police might not want to take to the Crown Prosecution Service to prosecute, because ultimately that's what has to happen, right? The CPS has to go, yeah, there's enough of a case here, and so there has to be like quite a lot of evidence gathering and whatever. And I suppose if there is a bit of political nudging to say we're going to take these seriously, the police might put a few extra resources in it, and I can see why that's.
Does feel like he's prioritised it at the moment, hasn't it? Yeah, and rightly so. Maybe it's to nip it in the bud.
Feel eggy.
Yeah, it does, but it might be. It might be quite a prudent political thing to do. But I just think it's so hasty, and I just wonder that all these, it's just going to be a big, huge waste of public money, because I think a lot of these might be overturned with appeal and stuff, because it seems a bit rushed and harried, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, I really don't know the details of this N-word thing, but I would be interested to know. I mean, I can't imagine just the use of the N-word itself being enough to like create a criminal record. It would have to be used with a certain amount of intent, and quoting a song lyric, in my mind, comfortably falls outside of that, right? Like, you know, if you're quoting a song lyric, you're not looking to cause harm. But I do want, and I'll go back to something that I said earlier, I do want a criminal justice system which looks at the full picture, and I believe every case turns on its facts. And something that we've learned from stand-up is, in the context of like, you know, people talk about stuff being taken out of context. There is such thing as like the context of the relationship between the performer and audience, and so
the arena, basically.
Yeah. That's exactly it. And some of the things which I like, if I try and explain to someone why I don't want my material filmed and put online, it's not because I'm ashamed of it, or it's not because I think that the material is
dubious,
sexist or racist or whatever. It's like, in the context of me forming a relationship with an audience, I've got the permission to say those things, and it's welcomed. Whereas that video, I don't know what timeline it's going to be thrust into.
Yes,
right?
True.
With the context of, look at this awful man saying these awful things. And that's why I think comedians, we have a lot of sensitivity to the idea of context. And it's not just the context is, I'm a woman, therefore I can say this, or I'm a person of color, therefore I can say this. It's the context of the relationship between the person that's speaking and the recipient, and them being amenable to it. And like, I could say to you, I'm gonna fucking kill you if you say one more thing. Mm-hmm. But if I said that in the Three Speech podcast as part of banter, that you're gonna take that and you're gonna laugh at me saying it, right?
Like, well, it's a contract, isn't it? It's an unwritten contract.
The contract's exactly, because the contract's been established between us. And you know, I guess I'm reluctant to say black people and white people should be treated the same in terms of the language they can use. Well, I don't agree with that, because that's not how the world works in reality. That because we know that a black act has a wider berth with an audience about words they can use. So for me, it's like, why should the law try and change the way the world is?
That's what I'm saying. That's the trouble. Identity politics, right, is a social thing for me. And that's where it should be, and where it should remain and reside, and it always should be considered. Like mansplaining, for example. Now, obviously, if you was prosecuting a female defendant in court and she couldn't turn around and shut you up and complain of mansplaining, because you're now in a more elevated arena where shit's got real, to use that sort of phrase. But that's what I'm saying. Then now identity politics is being factored into the application of the law, and I do worry about that. I don't worry about it at all. That's a lie. I can see potential problems.
Okay, but there's another way of framing that, which is what you're describing as identity politics. Can just, like, another way of describing that is the context of the individual.
Identity, though, it's not the individual. This girl was prosecuted apparently, or investigated, or arrested, whatever it was. Again, I should have done my research, but I don't. That's my MO.
She was hung, drawn, and quartered.
Well, she was put to death because she's a Caucasian, and that's identity. That's identity. Because if she'd have said that word and was black, she wouldn't have been, Ollie. But so that's identity.
On the facts as you've made them up, I agree.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing. I mean, you know, if you want facts, you can go read something, I guess.
That is a great tagline to this podcast. If you want facts, go and read something.
Right, it's called the Intellectual Abattoir for a reason. That's not a highfalutin title. I know that this is where ideas get murdered and come to die. Because I actually, on that, I believe that intellectualism has now become an orthodoxy, and I think that challenging the orthodoxy is more people are. I think it's more out in the open in a strange way. People that challenge the orthodoxy have got more of a platform because of non-legacy media, like new media, if you like. But I also feel that people
are 100% because social media amplifies the extremities, whereas mainstream media amplifies the middle of the bell curve. I mean, that's the reason for that.
But the people that challenge the orthodoxy are more derided as well. I mean, when you got Dom Jolly, I don't know if you've seen his latest. I just think you're just coming across like a cunt, mate. Like he's like attacking.
He's very self-righteous, isn't he?
Yeah, and I mean, you can find someone who thinks the Earth's flat and might not be all there and call them a fucking idiot, and you go, well, that's a bit like kicking a puppy, mate. Like I don't know, it just seems a bit mean-spirited.
Yeah, I sometimes feel this way about James O'Brien. That
yes,
he does bait utter morons that like.
And the guy screening the calls puts through the people saying.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I don't doubt that James O'Brien is a very good verbal tactician and can, like he did with Farage, he can make people twist and turn to their own words, and like he's good at that. But getting some moron to go, we've got our sovereignty back, and then him saying, okay, great, which law are you pleased has been overturned? And he knows that they haven't got one.
Yeah.
Like, for me, I actually don't know how that does advance the debate.
No, shooting fish in a barrel, certainly. But anyway, I just wanted to talk to you about the law. I don't understand the law. So do you not see any problems, or as someone interested in the legalities of things?
Yeah.
Do you also share my whatever it is? I wouldn't say concerns, but it's definitely a fascinating shift in sands of law at the moment. Maybe. And I always thought the law was the law, and obviously they bring in new ones. Like there was no such thing as piracy until they invented cassettes, for example. But I feel like this seems to be like civil liberties are being curtailed, infringed. Do you think it's an interesting time for the law?
I think it's very interesting. But what I think is interesting, the way that I see it is how lucky we are that we're even talking in terms of curtailments to civil liberties, where still lots of countries don't even have basic principles of like what you're actually doing is defending some human rights, right? You're defending rights to privacy, you're defending right to freedom of expression, you're defending right to a family life. And I think that one of the kind of sad things about the tenor of the current debate is that people who were typically on the right would be delighted that we're upholding these values, and it has. And I think it's a bit of a shame because what we're actually doing is we're arguing about where these liberties that we fought so hard for, right? This idea
and
that
maybe take for granted.
Yeah, well, totally. And the idea that the law is supposed to protect our ability to express ourselves, whereas you only need to go to a country like Malaysia, where I spent a good chunk of time during the pandemic, where there are literal religious police that will listen to a conversation at a mamak restaurant, and if you say the wrong thing, we'll take you to one side and have a little chat with you. And we don't have that, right?
But we're edging towards it.
Well, you say that, but I still have faith, and maybe I'm being naive, in the fact that there is a bit of infrastructure still, right? If you actually want to put someone to jail, you've still got to go through a hell of a lot of loopholes. Not loopholes. Hell of a lot of hoops.
Hoops and hurdles.
Yeah, exactly. And like I see something like, I'm glad of the fact that Hugh Edwards has got the sentence that he's got, in the sense that we're not just going, oh my goodness, another BBC nonce. He's famous. He's appropriated so much public money by actually he's on the sex offenders register till he's almost dead. Like his life is absolutely ruined. He has been
there is that, yeah. But then again, do you not feel like what Starmer's come out and said, and it seems like with this very swift, harsh justice of the rioters, he hasn't been made an example of, and he is a higher profile case than those, you could argue.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess, like going back to the Just Stop Oil thing, there is such thing as a deterrent effect for that, because there were so many more of these things being planned, and I do think it meant there was a couple of delicate conversations between some middle class parents and their privileged offspring going, darling, maybe don't go and glue yourself to a bridge this weekend, right?
I think that's true. The middle class thing, because if you've got nothing wrong in your life, you just got to go. Oh, the planet's gonna die. I mean, it's such a middle class thing to worry about, isn't it? Armageddon. Everyone else is too worried about like the small shit.
Yeah, well, that is a really interesting observation. That like that it's like an invisible threat I don't know the answer to this, but I do find it interesting that certain causes, such as Palestine, for example, which is a totally worthy cause to get behind, and I'm absolutely not deriding anybody that cares about it, that can generate so much headspace from someone that's never been to the country, that's got no Palestinian friends. Like I find it curious as to how certain causes,
they capture the imagination,
and it's nothing to do with this being the worst thing that's happening in the world. Like, I'm sure it's one of the worst, and it might even be the worst, but it's not like we've ranked all the bad things that have happened in the world and gone, this current genocide is worse than others. And so it's something about the same with Coney. Do you remember the big Coney thing? I don't even remember.
Yeah, Coney 2012.
Yeah, so there's something about a movement or a brand or a positioning that galvanizes people. And I don't. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but the Palestinian flag is quite.
Yeah, I think there is. I think they just like them scarves.
But do you not think it's interesting? Like, I'm not saying that people that support Palestine shouldn't be, and I'm not saying that they're doing it for the wrong reasons. What I'm saying is, and I'm not even doing a what if, like, why don't you care?
Yeah, no, what about her? Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you care about the Uyghurs, or why don't you care about, whatever? But there's something that compels people about certain causes more than others.
Trendy cause somehow.
I suppose.
And also, they're so they give a fuck about that more than anything else. Like you said, I don't know how, and they're attacking or protesting at American campuses, central London. It's like, this isn't doing anything. You know that, don't you? It's grandstanding, I think.
Oh, I don't know if it's doing nothing. I mean, it definitely keeps it at the top of the news agenda, doesn't it? Because it has to be reported on.
What does that actually mean for Palestinians?
Well, I don't know, and I don't really know.
This has got nothing to do with anything. Can I just give you an observation about the two?
That's not stopped anything we've chatted about before.
Yeah, but I've had this observation. I don't know what it means, but there's two conflicts going on the globe at the moment, and I wanted to I don't know if the difference about the propaganda angle. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the propaganda was all the ghost of Kiev, lots of clips of drones killing Russians, and it's like we're killing more of them than they are us. And the Russian propaganda, old school propaganda, is the Russians would say, oh no, we're killing more of them. But in Israel Palestine, it's the opposite, and it's like they keep killing us, we're not killing them. It's like a propaganda to be the bigger victims of the two nations. I don't know what that means. It's just an observation I've noticed.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, this is one of, like, in 10 years' time, we'll be looking back at this period and we'll be joining the dots backwards and say a bunch of stuff is obvious. I think one of the things that probably isn't said enough is, like, we are at war with China. Like, I think it's better just admit that. Like,
it's just a non-conventional or new type of war.
Yeah, the definition of war has changed, but, like, it is a war. But they're not our friend, and we'll probably look back at the New Labour period of cozying up to China, and also Russia too, as, like, maybe a bit silly or a bit naive.
And Trudeau seems to be, he's a very big fan of China, isn't he?
Yeah, and so, we'll definitely, we'll look at, like, the fact that, like, Hong Kong has not been the beneficiary of this agreement that was struck with the UK in '97. Oh, sorry, well, it was struck under Thatcher, wasn't it? But it came into force in '97. And we'll look and go, well, of course, right? Well, of course, China's never going to respect it. But even now, we're acting all surprised, and having to do these emergency measures to give native Hong Kongers British passports and stuff. I just think that we're really, really, like, this must have happened in the past too, that we're kind of scared to make predictions about stuff which is kind of inevitable. And one of the things which I've tried to improve in my own life, and it's been a policy which I've had for the last couple of years, and it's kind of helped, is if I get an uneasy feeling about something and I need to have a difficult conversation, I'll shorten the gap between having that feeling and having that conversation. Like, I won't stew on it for a long time. And I think generally that's like a good heuristic, that the moment you're like, this seems like it's on the wrong trajectory, acting. And I think we've seen that, we kind of could have seen this with Russia 15 years ago when people were being poisoned in our own country, and we were like, that's an outlier.
And interfering with the American election. We're going, we'd never do that. That's the sort of thing they'd do, but we wouldn't.
Yeah, and I think like we're a bit too reticent to kind of call things out for what they are.
Well,
because we think it's going to, we think it might change the course of history. No, all it will do is it will just act as an accelerant for what we're going to have anyway.
But then again, I don't want to get into this whole can of worms so late on, but isn't that what J.K. Rowling and et al. Are doing when they're talking about potential problems of males in female spaces? It's like they feel uneasy about where something might be headed, so want to talk about it now, and then everyone's like, why would you bring up that hypothetical thing to be transphobic? And that's basically where I am with the social media clampdown. And I'm sort of going, this does feel like the very first baby step towards a sort of totalitarian China style.
Yeah, but one thing which I suppose I could say to lessen your worry is, I think this idea of having the ability to broadcast to the world in an unfettered way, it's so new.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
I do agree.
And what I mean by that is, if you think even 20 years ago, so well within our lifetimes, right? Only 20 years ago, if you wanted to actually broadcast to the world, maybe 25 years, you'd have to go through a television network. Or you'd have to go through a radio network, which is very heavily
editorial again. You'd need
very heavily edited, but not just edited. Those editors will also answer to lawyers, the answer to Ofcom, the state broadcasting, watchdog, and so it's actually, there's been no point in history where even like a king, if they gave a royal edict,
platform, right? Everyone's got a platform.
Yeah, and it's so new, and so this idea of like. And another thing that makes this more tricky is, in the past, we never had a problem with things like phone. So, like Telegram was in the news last month because people were using Telegram for nefarious means, right? And people were saying, the founder of Telegram should be arrested and convicted in the personal capacity. Yeah, and people were supporting that on the basis that, well, his platform is being used for criminality. We didn't do that for the people that created the telephone network.
Exactly. Your mobile phones were pages.
And there's one reason for that, I think, and that is because the government, with all of these technologies, still had a handle on it, right? It was still smaller than the government. So the Royal Mail, the government could, and still does, if it wants to, open up any letter.
Yeah.
With regular phones, they're not encrypted. So there's buildings
unless
in London.
Unless you shoot Trump, in which case they can't access your phone at all.
Exactly. But GCHQ in Cheltenham can tap into any phone in the country, no matter what network they're on, even if it's a foreign phone. Likewise with most internet traffic, even though we use HTTPS, we can still see metadata for loads of internet traffic. And basically, it's so recent. It's like in the last 10 years that we've now got a technology where the government, where it's now outgrown the government, and that I think is what we're actually dealing with.
So can I ask you one last question? So in that case, and I completely agree with you, that is the problem. We have now got this unprecedented ability to broadcast to potentially the whole planet. I mean, Kim Kardashian or someone,
It's also a double-edged sword that not only can we broadcast to the whole planet, so therefore the scope of people that we can cause harm to is potentially enormous. Whereas before, the laws were built around someone standing in a field.
That's what I was going to say. So why is the law? So you had publications which were held to libel laws, and then you had like conversation in the pub. Let's take those two things, and we all understood. Dickhead like me, that's what this is. I'm the dickhead in the pub talking shit that doesn't know anything, but has got quite an inquisitive, inquiring mind, but no knowledge. Right, that is my MO. Right. So you got the dickhead, barstool philosopher in the pub. And then you've got the opposite of that, which would be like a academic publication. Why is the law looking at social media as the publication and using that? Why isn't it being treated as just twats talking bollocks?
Well, I think that is a very, very, very good point. And I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head that if it was just twats talking bollocks, then the range of people that are affected by that bollock talking is tiny. Whereas this video, I'm expecting it to do hundreds, if not millions of views. On like, basically, if this was us in a pub, who cares?
Yeah,
right. Whereas if we were to incite some hatred, or if we were to cause some harm, the scale of that harm could be potentially like infinite, right? Like,
yeah, sure, I understand. Harm. Yeah.
And that, I think, is where, like,
but it's a new technology. It is uneducated. Not you. I know you'd probably argue that. It's what I mean. It's untrained. It's unedited, as in not editorial. It is unfettered conversation, but they're treating it like it isn't. And it's just the new world. It's connectivity.
But we are publishing, and the other side of that argument, of course, is you and I could have a WhatsApp call where it's encrypted so the government can't listen in. And that's the other side of things. Like, let's say you and I were plotting a terrorist attack or plotting a murder or something where we could cause harm. I believe the job of the state is to prevent that harm, right? Like, I don't believe the job of the state is just to punish us when we do it. I do believe if there's a way that they can prevent it, they should. And again, this is the first instance ever where there's communication methods that have now leapfrogged the government's capability.
And when YouTube started, I mean, what's YouTube, for an example, or Twitter? It goes from, like, now things get tens of millions of views. Do you know what I mean? I know, but it's just interesting to me. So, how about this then? So people would say, if you state you're a parody account on Twitter, you get treated with you get scrutinised to a different level, right?
Is that only according to Twitter's rules. I think the law doesn't really see the difference.
Okay.
But I think Alfie Brown's a good example of, like, Alfie Brown got in.
Yeah, he's in Norwich tomorrow, and I asked him to come in the studio, but he hasn't read it. That's what I'll say. He hasn't read it. Otherwise, of course, he would have.
He's a very nice guy, I think. But he had a big old issue when a routine of his.
Again, the context was stripped.
Yeah, and I watched his show about it, and he does regret it. And also he made a great joke. He went, "People are telling me you're only sorry because you got caught." Yes,
that's everyone. Of course.
That is why I'm sorry. It was very funny. But he did a routine which used the N words, and then
then he criticised Corbyn, and it came up all of a sudden by magic.
Exactly, which he shouldn't have done, and then blah blah blah. But the point is, at the time, he quote unquote got away with it. It probably was
under the radar.
Exactly, because the pool of harm was the 50 people in that room, and you probably did have people in that room going, "Who the hell is this kid?" Right? But probably it didn't cause criminal levels of harm, but circulated on Twitter with the context, "Get angry about this," there probably was legitimate harm and legitimate offence
in the people sharing it.
Yeah,
I get that's what I was trying to get at when I was saying about the parody account. But you've used a better example. I was going to say a parody account could do a sketch or a tweet, and then someone retweets it. They're not a parody account. Does it then stop becoming satire and become spreading malicious? I don't know. It's an interesting thing. Could you? Oh God, I've suppressed my COVID cough until the very end.
So does Darius have COVID? Should he not come round?
He's got COVID. But I don't know if he should come round. I don't think they're necessarily not to come. He sent me a link. There's a new one. It's called I don't know.
I don't want to get COVID.
This one's worse than the first one. It's back. I've got like a really dry, tickly cough. And then the symptoms change from hour to hour. Like, I'm feeling a bit better because I don't know if I've got a weak bowel or IBS, but every time I get anything, it seems to get me there. And the first COVID, the real COVID, the alpha, whatever it was, the first one, I just worse shits, man. And so now I got this, I got the shits. Then I feel a bit better. Then I get hot. Then I feel a bit better. Then I get. COVID's the weirdest thing that me and my now wife but girlfriend had it back then, the first one, and we both had it at the same time. I felt awful. And out of 10 symptoms, we had about 3 in common. And I'm thinking, don't doctors diagnose illnesses by the symptoms? This is the weirdest fucking thing that everyone got it different. Definitely made in a lab in China, wasn't it? Yep, we can agree on that.
The lab leak theory does seem the most
yeah,
most
I mean, there's a COVID
now.
factory opposite the market where they said it came from, basically, isn't there? Occam's
And
razor.
also, you could totally imagine ways in which that whatever they were developing in that factory could make it to the market anyway, somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think I never had the vaccine. I was anti-vaccine, but that vaccine. But I think the spike protein, which doesn't appear in nature, I think HIV had the spike proteins. That might have been man-made. I think the spike proteins get in and they fuck you up. I've got my heart hurts with this one. Like, I go up the stairs and I'm like, I've got really chest pains. I think that spike protein gets in your heart, ventricles and arteries and shit. But I never had the vaccine, but I think the COVID's got the spike proteins, hasn't it? They look like JML dryer balls. Which are also made in China. I love JML dryer balls, by the way. Do you use them?
What do you do? Do you show them at your house or something?
Yeah, no, I put them in the tumble dryer and you don't have to iron anything. Your jeans come out all soft and they're brilliant. Anyway,
why? How does that work?
They're like little rubber landmines.
I know my nan used them.
Yeah, they get hot and they circulate round, so they dry things quicker. And also, they sort of bash the fabric, and instead of going all stiff, it sort of like massages it out and relaxes it.
Why don't tumble dryers just come with these as standard?
I haven't got a tumble dryer anymore or a microwave. But I don't know what that's got to do with anything. But I used to have a tumble dryer, and I always had JML dryer balls. I wore them out. I never would tumble dry without them. As long as you don't overload. Listen, I should be sponsored by JML dryer balls. Because I've used other
the caliber sponsor this.
I've used other dryer balls, Ollie, and they are no good. But anyway, thank you so much.
JML is a crazy company, actually, isn't it?
They're Pfizer are JML. They just buy other people's ideas and patents. Pfizer don't do anything. Pfizer aren't a pharmaceutical company. Pfizer are a licensing company. They went to Germany and bought COVID the vaccine.
Really?
Yeah, Pfizer just buy things. They buy patents.
What is JML?
It's a company that, if you was an inventor, right, and you invented something proper shit, when it's sort of like a shoehorn on the end of a fucking extendable
It's always
pole.
Stuff that they sell at
it's for old people.
Garage forecourt.
When it's like for old people, like a jar opener and that sort of
man,
thing.
the amount of money my nan wasted on catalogues. She'd get catalogues
delivered,
and she'd just buy fleeces and it would all, and like shoes that were just absolute crap, and it would all come in the post. And like
slippers with zips in them.
She'd be writing out her credit card information in squares on a bit.
Yeah. They love all that, didn't they? It's like doing a crossword.
Oh, and I mean the house clearance was just it was basically like a JML warehouse.
Yeah.
It was just.
Did you have anything good away?
No, it was mainly handbags and shoes.
I'd imagine that your sort of relatives would leave behind like silver fish knives and stuff.
Oh no! The best thing my nan left was a turkey
baster.
No, the carver. The things which has two.
Oh yeah. Like like a Moulinex, like a little chainsaw.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my grandparents didn't have lots of money, so.
Yeah, but you still said grandparents. That's posh as fuck.
Well, what should I say?
Nan and granddad.
Well, I called her my nan. But I actually called her Nanan, because apparently as a kid that's what I used to call her, and it's just stuck. And it never occurred to me that that's embarrassing until I must have been about 18.
I never occurred to me until I got married and she's that my middle name's embarrassing, because Darius just laughed out loud when they said.
What's your middle name?
Timothy. Fuck off, Oliver.
You're called Timothy.
Wait, my poor mum was sat there going, what's everyone laughing at? Anyway, thanks so much. We could talk again. I'll get you back on all things legal. Do you feel like how R-worded were my questions?
I thought it was good. I think the point of these discussions is, right, it's so easy to be reactionary about like, well, this feels wrong, this feels wrong. And the point of good law is to not be reactionary, but have a kind of a set of principles. And I think the best thing you can do when you're seeing, like, when you're thinking about these news stories, is to go, well, I feel this way about this case, but let's play a counterfactual in my head.
Yeah, that's what I've tried to do, actually.
Yeah, and I think you have. I think that's why this discussion's been good. That you shouldn't just be results oriented with developing a legal framework.
And I don't want things to go my way. Like if I see someone who I find abhorrent getting punished too harshly, you must call that out, right? Because you could say my enemy's enemy is my friend until your enemy that does the other enemy starts getting loads of power. Now he's your enemy and you're fucked, right?
Put that on a tea towel.
Yeah, I know. A fucking beach towel. That was quite wordy, wasn't it? Anyway, where can people find you, Ollie?
Ollie on Instagram, Ollie Horn Comedy, and I send out an email once every 6 months.
Are you going to tour your Comedy for Toxic People show?
No, it's too hard to tour. It was a good show, but I was just getting so much
record it
hate.
with the RGB network.
I don't know if I can even record it. I don't know if I want to put it online because of the context.
What is it? Is it contentious or?
It's really misogynistic and sexist.
Oh, sounds great.
Well, it's hilarious. It's really funny.
Well, all the funniest stuff is misogynistic and sexist.
But it's only funny when I've earned the trust of an audience, and
I haven't. Oh, we got right to the end. Anyway, Ollie Horn, thank you so much. And I'll get you back on next time there's a legal issue I need to pick your brains about.
Fantastic. Love you. Bye. Goodbye, Timothy.